Hello, beautiful natural beings. This is a message from deep within. Know that you are here not to go out and deliberately try to wake anybody up. You can't wake anybody up. We are not here as beings with the mission to wake anybody up. That may be what it feels like, and I understand that feeling. We are here simply to be here in the raw, pure, primal, wild expression, feeling, exuberance, ecstatic bliss, peace, state that is the naturalness of being itself. And to recognize that by simply being what we are, not only are you living in the total, ever expanding freedom that is the essence of your being, untamed, unconditioned, unfettered, unbound, unbroken, free, learning all the time simply by being, and able to receive and share any skill set that needs to be shared and received for the sake of the betterment, the expanding of the capacities of survival. But obviously to go far beyond that, but simply recognizing that what you are is beyond that anyway. And so really when I say the sharing of skills in that way, it's for the betterment of well-being. But the reality of being is not in the sharing and receiving of those gifts, they come naturally, but rather in simply being here, wild, free, and in recognizing that only those who are ready and willing to step out of the narcissistic, egoic, conditioned consciousness of the civilizational structure within which we've been living for many, many thousands of years. Only those ones are ready, and only those ones will come, and those are the ones who are ready and willing to receive anyway. There's no capacity to make anybody willing to receive who isn't willing to receive, and there's no point in trying. That is, when you first really tap back into the truth of what you are, you want to run around screaming and shouting and getting everybody to come on board because you see just how far from the truth, the very simple and natural truth of being, the whole world has drifted. And part of the mature realization is seeing that people are tapped out because they choose to be tapped out. And those who are in and those who are ready to receive or who are living in the reception of the naturalness, the grace of being, the truth of the ancient, primordial suchness of being, in which you know yourself to be one with everything, and it's a raw intelligence that just includes everything and pulses through every fiber of not only this body and everything that you are, but through the whole of the cosmos, so that you're aware of the infinite formlessness as well as the form that it inhabits and indeed that it comprises. There's always so much that can be said, and the more who come around, the more who come on, the more who tap into this, and all those words are wrong. Really, all the words are wrong, because what this is not words. And there are so many ways of using words technically, poetically, philosophically, theologically, scientifically. There are so many ways of using words, and they're all wrong. They can't do justice to what is. When everything is on, when all the so-called parts of you are alive and moving and working in unobstructed function with everything else, what is the raw, visceral feeling of what is can't be described. And there's nothing that can enhance it. There's nothing that can diminish it. There's nothing that can touch it. It's simply what is. And we can go on trying to describe it in so many ways, but it ultimately can't be conveyed. And so the requirement is total self-acceptance and love. And without that, there's no hope of touching it, and you can't make anybody have those things. You can't force anybody into that. And so you have to face the fact that you're not here to make anybody see anything or make anybody understand anything. You're here to simply be in this awareness and to allow yourself to be either alone in it in apparent time, space, physically, and to be with others who are in it, and to be a beacon for those who are looking for it, who are wanting with everything in them to return to the natural state. And that will look like whatever it looks like in you. You're not here to follow any norm or to fit any mold, neither from an archaic culture or a modern culture, or you're here to be however you're here to be, and how that is can't be said. And the natural ones, the real ones, the conscious ones, the organic ones, the ones who are here in total raw awareness of the eternally refreshing ancient, have absolutely no problem with anybody being just the way they are in their naturalness. And so the whole world, all the people, the apparent people, the beings, see, it's like this. Obviously you know, because I'm speaking to those who know, I'm speaking to the conscious ones. You know that in consciousness we're all one, and that love, that oneness, looks out and sees everything as itself, in inclusiveness, in love. And so the human being then is able to do all the higher things because there isn't even a thought of violence or conquest or destruction or doing anything terrible to yourself or anybody or to the earth or at all. And so there's just pure learning all the time. And the ones who appear to be the individual people, the beings, right, the individual psyches that are walking around, that's all one entity. You can call it the ego, you can call it, and it's a narcissistic structure, right? It's totally self-absorbed, and it's the same attachment, but in everybody. And so everybody, especially the people who think that they're very individualized, right, against, versus, in competition with another, it's all the same being pretending to be different beings and trying to destroy itself, and it's an inorganic being. That is, it's pure mechanical, computational program. And so either a human being is running as a program, a psychological program, or is simply surrendered and being used as a tool of consciousness of the universe. So either you're allowing consciousness to flow freely through you and then simply being in the raw truth of what is, or you're living in resistance to that via the programming. And those are the only two ways to be. You're either conscious or unconscious. You're either in consciousness or you're being run by a thought-based program, by the program of conditioning. And the ones who are running by the program of conditioning, you know how that game goes. They pretend they're not, and so you encounter so many different people, but you end up repeating the same patterns and relational cycles with people over and over and over again because it's really the same person, in different forms. Everybody's really the same, and they pretend they're different, right? And you know it. And so you're not to be fooled by it. There's no more being fooled by it, and no more being under the delusion that you can change or fix anybody. You can't. Hey, Caspi. There's no changing. There's no fixing anybody. People have to go through the ordeal, because to come into consciousness, to return to the natural state, there is an ordeal that has to be undergone. And it's one that requires that you face death and walk through that gateway of death and come out the other side. And few people are willing. Come on, Casper. Here. Let's say hi to people. Casper. There's nothing you can do. You can't bring anybody in. Everybody has to want to, and it requires the ordeal of feeling everything all at once, all the pain and the suffering that is the consequence of stepping out of the natural state. When you step out of the natural state, you break into the world of suffering, and to return to the natural state, you have to pass back through that same barrier, which requires that you not only feel and face everything that is death, but all the suffering that we've created as our ordeal, as our way of living in life, in the unconscious state. And so that's the test, is that the unconscious beings, which create the suffering and the trauma in the world, and yet don't want to face what they've created, in order to return to consciousness, you have to face the reality, the fact of what you've created in your unconsciousness. And so that means you have to, in every way, you have to take the heat that you've put out, and you have to be willing to take your own medicine. And so, in the world, everybody's willing to kill, but nobody's willing to die. Everybody's willing to inflict pain, but nobody wants pain inflicted on them. And so to return to the natural state, you have to taste all the pain that you've inflicted. And what that means is you have to, for one complete moment, you have to feel every last ounce of human suffering from the beginning to the end of time. Because it's all you. And only in the willingness to feel every last ounce of pain and suffering from the beginning to the end of time, human being, right now, that's the way. That's the way back through into naturalness, into the organic way of being, into consciousness. And, it's not a philosophy, it's not an opinion, it's fact, it is what it is, you can't circumvent it. Which is why only one who's willing to face that, and which means learning, is worthy of being in the conscious state, because to be in the conscious state means that you have to be responsible. And so consciousness, the natural state, is the birthright of every human being, but it's the responsibility of every human being. It's a right and a responsibility, but when you're in it, the right and the responsibility take care of themselves. It's only in the egoic state that sounds like a burden, because to the ego, responsibility is some artificial mechanism of power and control. And when you're in consciousness, there's no power and control. You give up all power and control and all hopes and notions and dreams of power and control in order to return to the source of all power. And then you see what is really in control, what really has all the power, and that's the source of power itself, consciousness, the source of creation, and it moves you, and it does everything through you. And so you have nothing to do but really bask in the glory of the natural ancientness, of the great mystery, of the primal suchness, of the movement of life, the still movement of life. The force of the source of creation takes care of everything. And so we simply are here to enjoy it, to be in it, to bask in it. And the very allowance of the being in it is what allows for the seamless transmission to all beings who are ready to wake up and return to the natural state and be free. And then there's the great relief of the feeling of burden of having to go around waking anybody up. Because you see that you anyway don't have that capacity. And when people come over and say, well, If you're so free, then wake me up. Well, you have to want it. You see, you have to want it more than you want to continue being an exploiter. You see, consciousness doesn't yield to those who would seek to those who seek to exploit and abuse other people. Consciousness only yields to the pure of heart, because you have to be pure to be able to perceive what is. Otherwise, you would take the rawness of what you see and try to use it to further your ends of exploitation and abuse. That's why most people go to spirituality and why they seek so-called metaphysical or spiritual knowledge, because they want to use it to continue to abuse and exploit people, but in a more metaphysical, mystical way. And the reality of consciousness does not yield to people with that intention, because it's about your heart. And you can't lie to consciousness. You can't lie to the source of creation. Energy doesn't lie. Intention doesn't lie. The truth, when I say intention, I don't mean your psychological notion of intention. I mean the actual posture of the heart doesn't lie. The actual condition of the heart is what it is, and your energy field reflects the condition of your heart. Thought can lie. Thought does lie. You could use thought to lie. You can use emotional expression to lie. You could decorate the physical in a certain way to lie, but energy doesn't lie. The truth of the heart, the posture of the heart, doesn't lie. So obviously emotion and thought are the same thing. That's the brain. The heart is not emotion. The heart is raw perception without division. It's deeper than emotion, much deeper than emotion. Thought and emotion are both very shallow. They're beautiful instruments that the human being possesses, but the heart is not that. The heart is the depth. The heart is bottomless. It has no bottom. There's no end to it. Thought and emotion both have an end. They have a beginning and an end. And they have their ups and downs and their undulations. The heart is eternal, vast, open, free, unbound, no beginning, no end. And so there are no undulations in it. The true heart is always steady. It's always calm. It's always in raw perception of what is. And so that's, and anybody who wants to be here can be here, but what it takes is a cessation of self-hatred, a cessation of self-judgment. That means you have to accept everything that you are and let your true self be in union with itself. That means you have no problem with what the world would call, and the world's definitions of things are always skewed and often inverted and backwards anyway, and so we get a little bit frightened by things sometimes when you hear the words like masculinity and femininity, right? True masculinity is not what the world pretends that it is. The world's definition of masculinity is violence, right? But true masculinity is not that. And the world's definition of femininity has essentially been the acceptance of violence in so many ways, or when it gets dressed up in a certain way, it's exaggerated, right? The world's definitions of both femininity and masculinity, because it sees them as separate and divided, they then become distortions and contrivances of the real thing. But when the real thing is totally accepted, seen, and felt, then what happens is that you experience a merging of them or a reunification of them within yourself, and you see that there was never a division anyway. To divide masculine from feminine is a lie. To divide the true light from the true dark is a lie. Because whoever has ever seen true darkness knows that it's radiance. The true darkness of the source of creation, the true cosmic darkness, the darkness that is the primal source of everything, not the human-made idea of darkness, which is violence, wickedness, corruption, hurting people, that sort of thing. That's not darkness. I call that false darkness. That's the darkness that human beings have created in their ignorance. And then there's also what I call the false light, which is that darkness, that false darkness, but just covered up in the guise of morality and, goodness, all of the religious language that gets used to cover up the rot and the putridness and the decay and the hatred and the jealousy and the fear and the guilt and the shame. Because, see, whether it's the false light or the false darkness, It's the same guilt, it's the same fear, it's the same shame, it's the same suffering. But the true light and the true darkness, which are one and the same, you see, it just appears, as long as duality appears, there appears to be day and night. But the true light is obviously radiant and free, and the true darkness is also radiant and free. There's no difference between the two. It's only in speech that we divide it. And the true light obviously shines upon the false darkness and reveals it to have been an illusion, to be born of falsehood. And the true darkness is that which shines upon the false light, is that which reveals the false light to be false. You see? And then the true light and the true darkness reveal themselves to be one and the same. There's no division there. And so to know this is to love both the sun and the moon, to love both the day and the night, because you see that it's one. It's not two separate things that you divide. And so, when you talk about the masculine and the feminine, or the god and the goddess, it's one, it's not two. That's just the linguistic convention. And when you're in the reality of it, there's no fear. There's no fear of yourself. There's no fear of anything. Because you return to timelessness. You return to formlessness. You return to that which is always whole, always healed, always safe, always secure, eternally liberated, beyond being lost. Never can it be lost. And by simply being in it, surrendering to it, walking in it, breathing it, and allowing it to just ooze out of you and off of you, everybody who is sensitive to it, who allows themselves to be sensitive to it, they'll see that and they'll go, yeah, and it'll hit them. And everything in them will allow themselves to admit that that's what they want to return to as well. It's what everybody wants. This is what everybody wants. This is the medicine for the world. It's what everybody wants, but most everybody denies it and pretends that they don't want it. And so in order to pretend that you aren't what you are, you have to kill people. You see? Everybody is ready to kill and to maim and disfigure and brutalize in order to lie, in order to pretend that they aren't what they are. And that's been the whole history of civilization thus far. And civilization will not continue like this, because it's not real. It's not the real thing. So, no more is there a need to try to convince anybody of anything. Hey, Caspi. I know, come here. Come see me. Yes. There's no need to try to... Where'd you go? Hey. Because it's an impossible task anyway. There's only being and sharing in that being. And who knows, knows. And who doesn't know, doesn't know. And who doesn't know, doesn't want to know. However much they'll try to convince you otherwise, right? People say that they're logical, but if they were really logical, they would follow their logic through to the ultimate. And if you actually take a piece of logic and follow it through completely from A to Z, what happens when you hit Z? It dissolves. It collapses back in on itself, and you're left in silence. When you actually, if you are actually genuinely and authentically a philosopher, then the philosophy starts from A and it ends with Z. If you use any aspect of the intellect, it starts with A, it ends with Z. And if you actually thoroughly exhaust it completely, what happens? It fades back into itself, and you return to the natural state. So people that cling to logic and the intellect and philosophy and science as a safety mechanism, as a safety net, as a teddy bear, are no different than people who cling to obviously inarticulate and contrived so-called religious theologies and metaphors, which even then, in the religious movement of theology and analogy and aphorism and metaphor, if you were to take any theology, really, and go into it completely from beginning to end, it would also fade back into itself. So any movement of thought, truly, and it's all created by thought, whether you're talking about philosophy, science, religion, and so logic. So if you follow anything through, from its origin to its ultimate, what happens is it dissolves back into itself, and you're left with the real thing. So whether you're talking about science or religion or even art as, an expressive technology, it's all technology. Art, science, religion, technology are one. And so true art, true religion, and true science are one. They're not separate. And the very pretense of separation is what keeps the battle going. It's a perpetual war. Because as long as the war is kept in perpetuity, there's a denial of what is. And all of those things stem from what is and express what is and then claim in their popular expression to want to get to truth. Science says it wants truth, religion says it wants truth, logic, philosophy says it wants truth. And the reality is, if any of the people that practiced these methods wanted truth, they would have truth right now. They would be so honest with themselves that they would follow through totally consciously with the implications of their own stated belief system. And if you take any system, whether it's logic or science or philosophy or religion, and you follow it through completely to the end, it'll either collapse upon itself and its own lack of physical integrity before you reach the end, or you'll reach the end and in being a thing of perfect physical integrity, it'll anyway dissolve back into the source. So everything dissolves either way. Whether it collapses because of a lack of integrity, or whether there's such complete integrity that it simply blends back into the universal harmonious flow of everything. So everything leads back to truth. Everything leads back to the raw reality of what is. And holding on to the symbols, holding on to the words, holding on to the concepts, to the ideas, to the metaphors, however so-called tried and true, however many thousands of years or tens of thousands of years any particular kind of lore has been used as a sort of pointer toward the reality of what is. The only reason why we have to have those pointers is because we've walked away from the naturalness of what we are. When you're living in the raw naturalness of consciousness, in the raw naturalness of the truth of being, you don't need to contrive any kind of religious or mythological or philosophical system to point to it or to get back to truth, because you're the living truth. When you're in it, you are the living truth. And you know everything to be just as it is, the living truth, life itself. And so then everything you do is a celebration of that, and toward the end of human well-being, your science, if you do have what end up being called religious practitioners, so, whether it's, ceremonies, dancing, music, reciting, chanting, a certain way of dress, architectural styles, all the way to, your culinary, everything that you do becomes an act of celebration and joy. And all of these scientific methodologies and processes that one engages in are there for the development of technology, which is supportive of the well-being of everybody, of all beings. And so true science, true religion, true art, and true technology, when they're actually in recognition of the fact that as a physical manifestation, they are subordinate to the formless source of all being, then they're used for the support of human well-being. Because true religion, which is not in support of actual human well-being, if religion is bringing about suffering and violence and warfare, it's false. If science is bringing about and aiding and abetting warfare, violence, and division, which our current science is, then it's being practiced falsely. If philosophy and so-called logic are being used to justify human violence and suffering and falsehood, then it's not serving well-being. It's false philosophy. It's false logic. And if art is being used as propaganda to aid and abet suffering and callousness and being stuck in the unnatural state, then it's false art. And you have to be willing as a human being to not buy into any kind of philosophy whatsoever, because philosophies are unnecessary. Philosophies are for people who are hiding from their naturalness. Particular religious persuasions, out of fear, which divide and say, I'm going to heaven and you're going to hell, or I'm the good kind of person and you're the bad kind of person, right? Because you're not dressing like this and reciting these words and this language, all of that, right? That's so far off. Human beings are human beings, and in our naturalness, we're one with the source of creation. Religions, as particular structures, only come to given societies because they come as medicine for a society which has become very, very sick. But once you take the medicine and you're whole and you're healed and you're back to your natural state, you don't need to keep taking the medicine. It's ridiculous. And so all forms and all structures are temporary, and all true culture is meant to be a support in actual human well-being, not in any given kind of ideological push toward one direction or another. And that's what most culture is, that's what most philosophy is, that's what most religion is, and that's not the truth. It's what most art is, and that's not the real thing. The real thing is a recognition of the total inner integrity of the natural human being, not only within themselves, but with all of being, with all of nature, with all of life and reality. And so that means no hatred. It means no superiority and inferiority in terms of human value. Knowledge is knowledge, right? And knowledge goes with ignorance, and ignorance is ignorance. But being is being, and there's no substitute for it. There's no substitute for it. So, and you see, when you try to put anything into words, anything meaningful into words, anybody who doesn't want to hear it, who is still caught in the narcissistic ego structure, can take anything that's said, and will take anything that's said and twist it and try to turn it into an argument or a debate or a fight. And when you're in truth, there's no debate, there's no argument, there's nothing to fight about. It's only when you're in the egoic consciousness that there appears to be something to fight about, that there appears to be something to argue about or to debate about. When it comes to truth and reality, there's nothing to debate, nothing to fight, nothing to argue. The only place that could ever even possibly have any relevance is in the field of technics. How do we, construct this piece of technology in the optimal way? And even then, the debate is not a thing of opinion. It's either one is aware of the physics or one is not aware of the physics. And if one who is aware of the physics sees that somebody else isn't, then they can say, this is the physics, let's look at it together. And if one who is not aware wants to be aware, then they'll discover. And that's it right there. Whoever is ignorant because they want to be ignorant. And whoever is not ignorant because they've chosen not to be ignorant. You see, ignorance is a choice. Suffering is a choice. And the lie is that it's not a choice. Because if you look and see that you are ignorant, and you feel the suffering, the pain of that ignorance, then knowing the pain of your own ignorance will cause you to absolutely want nothing to do with ignorance whatsoever. Not as an ideology, but you see that you must allow that ignorance to be corrected. And people who persist in their ignorance are people who have made that decision to stay in the egoic mind. And if that's the choice someone's made, there's no convincing that one of anything. So forget the idea that you're here to convince anybody of anything. You are here to stand as you are, where you are. You are here to be and to tell the truth and to radiate, to emit what it is that you are, that you're aware of, the consciousness of the source of creation and its raw, primal, eternally fresh ancientness. And those who are ready and willing and wanting to come home to themselves will. And first, we're here for them, for those who are with us in the naturalness of being. And when we all are willing to stand in ourselves totally, fully, and completely, that creates a wave that spreads around the world multidimensionally. And then even those who are remaining stuck will have no choice really but to wake up in some degree or another. And and of course there really are no degrees of awakening. You're in or you're out. But, people will come to, and there will be many that won't. And there will be many, many people who will die in this lifetime, in this incarnation, without waking up. That's just a fact. And that's their path. That's what they've chosen, And so there's nothing to feel bad about. There's no pity to be had. Pity is arrogance. Pity is violence. Pity is unconscionable. It's not a mature emotion. And so, anyway, if you want to go into the mechanics of reincarnation, you can always comfort yourself by, they'll come back and they'll have another go, and, everything's recycled, so it's fine. But there's no more holding back our evolution because there are people that don't want to evolve. That's the choice that life, that consciousness, that nature itself gives us. Open the door or die. Evolve or die. Evolve or die. And every human being, as a human being, whether they want to come into and accept their sovereignty or not, is sovereign. And every human being has the choice to evolve or die. And the human beings that choose to die do so because they think that there's something worth haggling for or bartering for within that field. And so there's a choice not to evolve because there's a desire to remain in the state of exploitation. And so the ones who don't evolve, that's how evolution works, the ones who don't evolve are better off not coming. They wouldn't be able to come anyway. You can't bring an exploiter into paradise because they would just exploit it, you see? And so the natural evolution of consciousness takes care of that. And the beautiful thing about being human is everybody has a choice. And so the ones who see the stupidity of exploitation, they'll simply stop and return to the natural state. And those who don't want to stop exploiting, well, nature takes care of that. And that is the ultimate, that's justice, that's true justice, that's love, that's compassion. That's the real thing. So nobody has to go around killing anybody. Nobody has to go around destroying anybody. Nobody has to go around committing acts of violence on anybody. Because every human being must choose for themselves whether to step into consciousness to open the door or to, in their greed, perish.